Hello, my name is Cassie and I'm a fashion historian at the V&A, and today in this Fashion Unpicked film we're going to be looking at these two beautiful examples of late 19th century dress. So these two garments were worn by American heiress Cara Broughton. She was born in Fairhaven, Massachusetts, and her father was one of the wealthiest men in the world at this time, Henry Rogers. We have Cara's wedding dress in the collection from 1890. And what's wonderful about it is it comes with her wedding portrait, so we can see what she looked like around this time. We know that this dress was worn when she was a young bride in her first marriage, but her first husband died after just 2 years of marriage, so she becomes a widow aged 23. And then later in life she meets Urban Broughton, an industrialist working with her father, and he was an Englishman. And this bodice from a full dress dates from around that time. These are just two items from Cara Broughton's wardrobe, but over 200 items of her dress survive, and they were found in a basement in Anglesey Abbey, which was her son's home. And the V&A has over 75 items of her clothing and accessories, and it's really quite rare to have that amount from a single wearer. These date from a time in couture history where Paris was really leading the way in terms of fashion, but American clients like Cara, with their bold fashion tastes, were providing the money to keep the couture industry afloat. This bodice dates from the mid-1890s, and it would have originally had a matching skirt. And we know it's from the mid-1890s because it's got this high neck, a nipped-in waist at the natural height, and these fabulous sleeves, which you really can't ignore. Large sleeves like this first had their fashion moment in the 1830s, and then again they come into fashion in the 1890s, and they get bigger and bigger until we reach this moment in the mid-1890s where they're at their biggest. And there's lots of talk of it in the fashion press, and mockery of how ridiculous women's fashions are, with satirical prints showing the kind of revolution of fashion styles. So a woman looking in the mirror at an 1830s woman, showing that this is a fashion revival of a previous style. Part of the point of having these big sleeves, aside from showing off all this fabulous fabric and trimmings, is that it makes your corseted waist look even smaller. Sleeves like this became known as gigot, meaning lamb, or leg of mutton sleeves, because they resemble a leg of lamb with the volume all at the top, feeding into a much tighter sleeve at the bottom. There's a real fashion at this time for having lots and lots of trimmings and different fabrics on one garment. And here is no exception. We've got this thick silk satin as the ground fabric, and then panels of embroidered fabric added onto this, and that's hand embroidered in silk thread. And then there's tiny, tiny little beads forming details on the floral design, and they would have originally been gold and much shinier. And then we've got this fine black net trimmed with black sequins, which are actually an example of an early plastic made from gelatin, and then black glass beading edged around that, and a very luxurious silk satin bow on the waist and on the neck. Cara Broughton was said to actually be quite a shy woman, and this is a very bold garment. And we also have lots of her accessories in the collection, and a lot of those are quite novel designs. So she has parasols with a head of an Egyptian pharaoh, a parasol with 3 pug heads that stick out their tongues. And I often wonder whether these very showy items were kind of conversation starters. So now this is off the mannequin. We've got the opportunity to look inside, and we can look for details of construction. And the first thing you might notice are these lines of boning to keep her waist tight and to keep the bodice smooth against her body. And these are made of baleen. So even though they're known as whalebone, baleen is actually the keratin substance that forms plates from the top of the whale's mouth. And it's what it uses to filter out krill and small plankton when it's eating. Baleen like this was used extensively in dress and corsetry from around the 1860s onwards, because it was a malleable but strong substance. And when it got warm, it kind of moulded to your body. And the extensive use of this material meant that these whales were hunted almost to extinction, and they're still a critically endangered species today. And the whaling didn't stop until 1935. The bodice is lined with a black silk, and this was treated with metal salts. And this had 2 functions, one as a mordant or a stabilizer to keep the pigment fast so it wouldn't run, but also it weighted the silk to give it a crispness. And this also had the benefit of the fact that when silks were weighed for their price, if they weighed more, they were worth more. This treatment of silks from the mid-19th century onwards actually causes problems. It causes the silk to shatter. So a late 19th century garment like this often survives less well than an 18th century silk garment. Interestingly, when you look at the bodice, you can see there's a little bit of asymmetry in the construction. So on this side, there's a seam which isn't on this side. And that's likely because they constructed the rest of the body, and when they got to this panel, they found they didn't have a single piece of fabric which could cover here. So instead they've pieced two smaller bits of fabric together to form this panel. And this was a really common practice when using a fabric which was as expensive as this silk. If I slide my hand inside, I can feel that there's a line of baleen, similar to what's here, which forms a curve around the top of the sleeve, helping to support the volume here. At the top of the sleeve, you can also hear a kind of crunchy sound. We think this is either some starch net or possibly even horsehair used to add to the volume. This is the earlier of the two dresses, and it dates from between 1889 to maybe 1892. So like the other dress, this is an example of formal day wear, and we know it's day wear because of the high neck and the long sleeves as opposed to a low cut bodice and short sleeves. There's a possibility that it's half mourning dress, so around this time mourning etiquette would have meant that you would have worn black clothing for a period after somebody dies, and then gradually you can introduce different colours with black trimmings. Having said that, black was also a very fashionable colour at this time. But around this time, Cara loses lots of her family members. So in 1890, she lost her sister Millicent, who died only aged 17. And she loses her first husband in 1892 and her mother in 1894. So there's several people she may have been wearing this garment for. Despite it possibly being mourning dress, it's still a highly fashionable garment, and we can see this both in its shape, but also the abundance of trimmings and different fabrics that are used in the dress. It's formed from a ground of ivory silk moire, and moire is the treatment that's done on the silk satin to give it a kind of wavy effect. It's also known as watered silk. But it's caught underneath this layer of fine silk organza. There are two different types of lace used in the bodice, both this floral design here and also another kind of more abstract floral design in this lace here. And it's quite common at this period to have very similar and slightly clashing fabrics in a single garment. And then there's also embroidery in strips on the bodice, silk velvet ribbon, which is used in bows but also trapped underneath the organza. And then finally, this cording around the top of the neck. We can see in this earlier dress the beginnings of fullness in the sleeve, here made out of this black lace. Looking at this dress from behind, you can see, similar to the other garment, there's these dramatic stripes of black lace which emphasize the smallness of the waist. And then here we have folded, stiff velvet ribbon and stiff moire silk, forming a slight fullness, which is the remnants of the bustle fashion of the 1880s. We think that maybe there was an additional layer of fabric that would have gone over the top of this to give it a similar look to the rest of the garment, and that this may have been a trimming made of this finer net. There are some mystery stitch marks around the back, which suggests that this is the case. So this bodice opens in two places. Here there's a line of hooks and eyes which tuck underneath this row of black lace to form the decorative panel at the front. And then the front opens by undoing here at the bottom, and then there's a line of hooks and eyes all the way down the front, which is how she would have got in and out of the garment. So here we have the waistband, which would have fitted closely around her waist. And we have the maker's label, Sarah Moya A. Moorhanger of Paris. And these silk labels were made popular by Charles Frederick Worth, who was the first to put labels in his clothing. And it's kind of the beginning of designer branding. So this would have been a very luxurious dressmakers in the best shopping district in Paris. Great care has been taken to line this bodice, and there's a mixture of machine and hand stitching. And perhaps the first thing you notice are the rough tacking stitches which attach the trimmings to the outside. There's whaleboning or baleen inside this bodice too, and here we can actually see some of it peeking out, and you get a sense of what colour it is and how it almost resembles a fingernail because it's keratin. Now that we've taken the skirt off the mannequin, we can see all the layers underneath. This small band of lace, a band of pleated starched fabric, the main silk moire skirt, and a band of silk organza on top. And this would have all created the fullness and the swoosh of the skirt when it was worn on the wearer. The skirt opens and closes with a single hook and eye, and we can see when we open it up there's a wider band of baleen which secures around the waist with these waist tabs, and when pulled tight would have created a domed shape at the back. And when we took this off the mannequin just now, we noticed a mystery pocket at the back here. And given where it's positioned at the back of the skirt, we don't think this is for storage. We think it might have been originally filled with some padding to create a bit more fullness at the back, but maybe in a later dress fitting they decided it didn't work so well and the baleen worked better, and they've stitched it closed. There's no way into this mystery pocket. What's really nice about having two dresses worn by the same wearer is that we get a sense not only of moments in fashion, but we also get a sense of moments in her life. And there's something so special about getting a sense of a person and their life through the clothing that they wore.